Hey, Slapdog! The Brainiacs are ready!
Welcome in to Leather Brains. Your host Slapdog here, and boy do we have a lot to discuss today. We got a mock draft, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to be talking about mock drafts. We're going to be talking about draft strategy. We're going to do some preseason camp discussion and cleanup there. I am joined today by both Scotty Del Rey and Alan on the mics. Gentlemen, welcome aboard to episode 123. 123, baby.
Ooh,
1, 2, 3.
nice.
Yeah,
Mock,
we made
locked,
it.
and ready to rock.
Locked and ready to rock. Let's do it, guys. Let's get down to business.
Hey, boys. Let's get down to business.
I'm only going to say this one singular time this year.
Oh, okay.
29
so
days.
You say it again, we get to punch you directly.
Damn it,
into
you
your
interrupted me, and I can't say the first part. There's a certain amount of days until kickoff season, because I already said the first part of it, so here we are.
29 days.
Thank you, Scotty. I almost fucked that up. There is not that much time until the NFL season starts, so it's very, very exciting. Fantasy drafts are in full swing, and we are getting ready for fantasy football season and alongside the NFL season, of course. So first piece of news here. Kareem Hunt signs with the Saints, ?
Maybe.
Slow your roll. Not so fast, because he hasn't yet. Kareem Hunt this last week went to New Orleans, and upon him landing there, before he even got to the facility, Indianapolis called and they offered him more money before he worked out, because the Colts are desperate for some running back help. I think some of this coincides with perhaps the arm breaking of their backup and the John Taylor news, which we'll talk about in a second. But Kareem Hunt, he did have a great visit with New Orleans, and now he's going to Indianapolis on Wednesday, which is today, in order to work out for them and meet with them about potentially signing. Alvin Kamara suspended for 3 games. Eno Benjamin, he tore his Achilles, so this free agent visit definitely makes sense. Kareem Hunt, I think, is probably one of the cheaper running backs that's currently on free agent right now, which is why he's more of a hot commodity than somebody like Dalvin Cook or Zeke. Interesting. I think for the Saints, we did find out that Alvin Kamara, like I mentioned, he is suspended for 3 games. So I was expecting more of a suspension. I don't know how you guys initially felt about that, but does this really do anything for Alvin Kamara from a fantasy football perspective in your eyes?
I mean, his efficiency metrics have been dropping precipitously for several years now.
Great
so
verbiage.
with or without, precipitously, yeah. Don't ask me to spell it. 'Cause I don't
Isn't
know.
that rain?
Yeah, basically. But if I don't know, his suspension doesn't do anything for me in terms of his value, because I was kind of fading him anyway. But who knows? I guess if it drops far enough, maybe he's a value pick.
Yeah,
Perhaps so.
Besides the rain falling on him, I think as we went through the mock draft, we found out pretty quickly, and I think Yeti commented first, was like, if you don't get some of those top running backs, you really have to roll the dice afterwards. Like you're gonna have to take the risk. And I hear the negative on Kamara, and I wouldn't throw all the eggs in the basket. I think the 4 games, the suspension, I don't know the rhyme or reason to it anymore, but I still think it's worth a flyer.
Yeah, for him, it's just it's a matter of, do you think Jamal Williams is also going to be a factor in that offense? I mean, he was with the Lions last year, and he's not young by any stretch of the means, but he's somebody that he broke the touchdown record last season. He was like their goal line back. So if you think that Williams is going to be involved in that way, then yeah, it could potentially be somewhat of a factor in that regard. Moving over to Indianapolis, there is some more drama here, fellas. Colts signed Kenyon Drake on August 4th. That was this last Friday, with a potential holdout coming, and Marlon Mack, as I mentioned, their backup, breaking his arm. I think this shows that, especially with Hunt going there as well, I think there's a potential that the Colts fully expect John Taylor to sit out this entire season. Yeti and I talked about it last week a little bit, and the implications of what that would mean with John Taylor sitting out, but I want to get your guys' perspective on this entire situation. John Taylor has as we hashed it out last week, and I'll just give a little bit of clarity for anybody that's not familiar with the situation. John Taylor decides that he wants to get paid more money. He goes and meets with the owner. Owner tells him basically, no one cares if you die. If I die, the world goes on. I'm not paying you money. Furthermore, Jimmers say that he then went out and spent $20 million relocating a giant whale from one side of the country to the other. And some people are saying, well, why the fuck did you not pay John Taylor, but you're paying to relocate this whale? So what do you guys think about the John Taylor situation?
Yeah, the whale is very important and also not at all related. Obviously, Jim Irsay makes his own money, so he can do what he wants with his own money.
And I think that's
I think it's a
whale.
pretty genius marketing ploy on his part. He said, "Everyone fucking hates me right now. I'm going to do something great for this killer whale and get some positive press." Yeah, that's good. But ultimately, I think Indianapolis right now is just preparing for the worst. But it seems to me that they hold all of the leverage. And so the only way that this ends, in my opinion, is John Taylor comes back in place, because he's just going to be losing money if he doesn't. And the other thing, too, is that Indianapolis happens to have a ball carrier who is bigger and faster and stronger than Derrick Henry, and his name is Anthony Richardson. So you have to expect defenses to be stacking the box all year long anyway. I don't think they're too worried about paying a superstar back. I think they're more worried about developing an offense that is capable of getting around the defenses they're going to face because of their new quarterback. So I think the Colts are just doing what they have to do, but ultimately I expect John Taylor to play.
Yeah. I have a couple thoughts. One, I wonder what the rest of the coaches in that room thought when Jim said that. Were they like, no, we kind of like him. We kind of want him here. Shut up.
We're going to have to redo our whole playbook.
I think rewinding back to like how you kicked that off with the signing of Kenyon Drake, like the Colts still have a camp to run and they need running backs to run said camp. So a lot of it also has to do with just having bodies. So while it could be indicative of how the future is going to play out for Jonathan Taylor, I don't think he sits out. I think there's only one running back ever to like accomplish that in any shape or form, and he got paid, but it was kind of like at the detriment of anybody giving a shit about him from then on, which is Le'Veon Bell.
I was going to say, is it Bell?
Yeah. And so once the fines start kicking in and he starts realizing how much money is being left on the table, I think he will come back. But camp's already moving on, right? Like they've got these guys in play and they're developing. You have a young quarterback that's developing trust in all these players. So what does that look like for him? Now, you don't need a ton of trust to turn around and hand the ball off, but I still think that there's a little bit there that could be broken from then on. So it's like, even if he comes back, what are you getting from him? And what does the offense look like? And now they have all these other guys worked into a lather, but we'll see how it shapes out. But I fully expect them to be back.
I'm also interested to see how all of this, especially in light of other running backs who have tried to pull this stuff in the past. The impression that I'm getting right now is that a lot of the media and a lot of players are kind of on the side of running backs saying, yeah, you're getting screwed. But imagine you're a player on the Indianapolis Colts. Your star running back is choosing not to be there on the field with his teammates. Is that going to negatively impact John Taylor's relationship with his teammates? And are they going to say, hey, man, I understand you want to get paid. I understand you want to handle your business, but we're trying to be a successful football team here, and we need you to do that. So you got to be there for your teammates. So it almost concerns me that there might be some sort of ancillary issues that arise because of John Taylor choosing to not play football with his team.
I don't know if I would be concerned with that. I think, this isn't high school football. This isn't something where everybody's in the locker room and it's week to week basis. Everybody's there for each other. I'm sure that there is some of that in the NFL, but it's much more of a selfish game, I think, in some ways than a lot of people realize. And I don't know, because I'm not in the locker rooms, of course, but you think about it and it's, how can I stay in this game as long as I can and make the most money that I can while still being successful as a team? And so I think there's a little bit more of a selfish piece that goes into that. I don't know that concretely, but that's what comes to mind when I think about that.
It's still a job. Everybody talks about that second contract. I think they know exactly what JT's doing, and I don't think anybody would necessarily hold it against them. Again, I think it's just the reps, right? It's that working into the system. How does this work? Are you picking up pass protection? How long can Jonathan Taylor stay in the game and be valuable? And if they have other backs that are like knowing exactly how to block for him and they're picking up the scheme, there's, even though he's been there for a while, like things still change over time. You build in, your game plan moving forward. And so they're still out there, but I think it's a business. Ultimately, everybody gets it.
Yeah, and for me, you look at it. Let's just before we move on from the Colts here, look at it from the other side of the coin. Obviously we know John Taylor. And we play fantasy football, so we have our vested interest in this whole thing. But you look at it from a business perspective, and you have a player who you have made an agreement with and a deal with, and then he goes out and he says, "I want more," and it's like, okay, hey, look, man, we agreed on this. From the onset of you being a rookie, this is what we agreed on. You don't get to come in here and demand more. Now, obviously, there's a lot more that goes into that, but you look at it from like a business side, and I think Jim Irsay had even said some of this, is like, we had an agreement, and now you want to break the agreement because you feel as if you are entitled to more. Perhaps he is, because he is one of the best running backs in the NFL at this point, but just something to point out and something to think on, because there's two sides to this coin. So last thing here, running back Joe Mixon. Will he face a suspension? Scotty, I'd like you to maybe give your thoughts and opinions here. I know you did a little bit more homework than myself on this one, so why don't you fill us in on the Joe Mixon news? You mentioned there's not a lot, but fill us in.
Yeah, so they're not releasing a lot of details about this because both all of the legal parties involved basically said, we don't want to handle this in the media, we want to handle this in the courtroom. So they're not releasing a lot of information. But from what we know, from what I understand about the situation, is that there was a shooting that took place on his property. Joe Mixon was not the one who pointed or shot the gun. It just happened to be on his property. From what I understand, it's his sister that did it. And the charges were dropped almost immediately with the understanding that additional charges could be brought later on. And that's what happened. So now he's being charged with, I think, it was some sort of misdemeanor. But obviously the situation itself, with how the NFL tends to handle this, they like to make examples of players, Alvin Kamara, for example, who, just because the legal situation is sorted out doesn't necessarily mean he's not going to face punishment by the NFL, which is possible. But at this point in time, we just don't really have enough information about the situation. To me, based on what we know, okay, Joe Mixon wasn't the one who did the shooting. So, what could they have on him? So there must be more to the story. Or you have somebody trying to get money from a rich guy, which is also possible. So I don't know enough about it. I don't know if anyone knows enough about it to really say for sure what's going to happen.
Perhaps we should not be shooting at each other. Maybe that's what he needs to tell his sister.
Wise.
Yeah.
But it happened on his property. So, a reasonable person could surmise, okay, maybe there's trespassing involved. You have the right to defend yourself. We don't know all the details. So, it could be a justified situation. It could be a totally unjustified situation. We just don't know.
Yeah. I mean, here's the thing. I think he's probably fine. That's me just totally shooting my shot in the dark, because we'll see what happens here when it comes to the court system of law. But court system slapdog says I think he's probably fine. And for fantasy purposes, Joe Mixon's still one of the top running backs in this year for me in redraft formats. I really like Joe. I'm saying it like I know him on a first name basis, but he's in one of the most explosive offenses. He is one of those 3-down backs. He's got PPR value. So barring any sort of suspension or whatever legal charges he may face right now, I'm full steam ahead on Joe Mixon.
We also do have to acknowledge that this is not the first legal trouble that Joe Mixon's been in, because I don't think he was in the NFL yet, but he did have to serve community service and pay a fine because he punched a woman in the face and knocked her out cold, and it was caught on video.
Can't be doing that. This isn't
his first run in with the law, so I don't know if that'll play a part in it or not.
Can't punch women.
You shouldn't punch anybody, but you definitely shouldn't punch a woman. So maybe he was the one holding the gun and his sister's taking the downfall.
Oh, maybe. Or I don't know if it was a sister or sister's boyfriend is what you have written. And I don't know.
Whatever. I hope that
we're out here just butchering the story, not even getting close.
Let's just make up our own story.
Are we sure this was Joe Mixon, or did you just find an article of some guy named Joe?
Could be another guy named Joe Mixon.
I think it was Joe Burrow.
Florida man named Joe Mixon.
Yeah.
Hands gun to his sister.
Last piece of running back news here, fellas. Cardinals running back Marlon Mack. He was not their starting running back, but he did tear his left Achilles. And he will miss the season. It's his second time dealing with this injury, as well as Bills running back Damian Harris left practice Monday with a knee soreness. He has yet to return. Latavius Murray has been filling in. So a lot of running back news today, but this is preseason. This is preseason camp. Players are going to get hurt. There is some drama. We got to talk about it. We got to fill people in because it does impact the fantasy football landscape. So that's it for that. Alan, why don't you take the reins here and steer this shit, buddy?
Yeah, I got it. Gentlemen, it is list and ranking season, I think, all over Twitter, or is it still Twitter or is it X? Do we call it X? Or
See, I think we call it Twitter still, solely because you type twitter.com to get to it. I'm not typing www.x.com. That sounds like a porn site.
When you type that, I'm going to look it up.
It sounds like a porn site.
It was very intrusive when my phone just started showing X as the app. I don't know why.
Okay. X.com does take you to Twitter.
Yeah. Does it really?
He did reroute it. Because fun fact, X.com used to be what PayPal was. And Elon Musk was one of the founders of PayPal. So he loves the letter X.
He does. It's weird.
SpaceX, you got X. His son's name was X.
Yeah.
He probably does a lot of X.
Yeah.
Anyways, on Twitter, on NFL Network, if any of the Brainiacs have been watching, it is list season. NFL players just came out with their top 100. It's all over the place. But rarely do we have a time and space where we actually kind of discuss a few of these lists. And for fantasy purposes, I thought it would be neat to throw some question your guys' way for us to go around. Side note, did you see Colin Cowherd's flub?
Yep.
Yeah, with Dwayne Haskins.
Quarterbacks that can't win the Super Bowl.
To be fair, he's not wrong.
No, he's not.
To be fair, he was not. He is dead, so he cannot win a Super Bowl. But that was
fact or
bad.
fiction.
That was really bad. That was terrible.
That's pretty
terrible.
That's pretty bad.
I
wonder if he did it as like a humorous thing and it didn't land, or like he.
No way. I don't know if death is
too soon for him. We can joke about it.
Okay.
Yeah, we can because we're small.
True. Okay, so as part of the list, one of them I wanted to get into was the top quarterbacks. So this is a list of the top 100, and these are our top quarterbacks. Gentlemen, I wanted to just bring this to you to see if we had any thoughts about anybody on here. And then for people listening and not able to see the screen, it goes Pat Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, Joe Burrow, Josh Allen, Herbert, Cousins, Rodgers, Dak, Jared Goff, Lamar Jackson. So the question I pose to you, gentlemen, which one of these quarterbacks feels too high and which one of these quarterbacks feels too low?
Initially, my mind thinks to what would Yeti think? And he would have Aaron Rodgers down at the very bottom. Oh man, I'm not high on Dak.
Are you surprised Hurts is above Joe Burrow and Josh Allen, or you think that's a knee-jerk reaction from the Super Bowl year, or does that feel right?
I think that's fair. I think it's within the realm of I think, perhaps Joe Burrow would be number 2 in my mind, but I think for the most part, I kind of like this list. I think that Lamar Jackson, I have a little bit higher up than somebody like Dak Prescott. I don't have a lot of respect for Dak. I don't think he's a great quarterback, and I don't think the Cowboys are going to be good this year. But I think Lamar Jackson is due for somewhat of a bounce back year. I'm not riding the wave that everybody else is, that he's going to finish as a top 2 quarterback. I don't think that. But I do expect him to be a little bit better than he has been in the years past, and that offense is going to look a hell of a lot better. So get Dak out of there. Jared Goff feels really gross, but the Lions are doing it.
Yeah. Speaking of Twitter clips, did you see all of Dak's interceptions that he seems to be throwing in camp?
Yeah.
I don't know why they're releasing that footage. I don't know why they would ever let that out of the can. Here's him throwing a ton of interceptions.
What they're doing
it's
a PR move. They're lowering expectations, which is genius. Under promise,
that's
over perform, and they've got it figured out down there. So Dak's going to come out and only throw, the second most interceptions in the NFL, and they're going to give him the MVP probably.
True.
Or they're just kind of teeing up the Cowboys fans to win 4 games this year. So they're like, hey, this is the best we fucking got. I hope that you guys like what we're seeing because this is all we got. So
that's what they should do. They should just start bringing in 10-year-olds to throw and be like, guys, see, we can't put them in. This is what we got. I agree with you. I thought Dak was a little too high. I thought it was a pretty decent list. Again, this was the one voted on by players, so this isn't some arbitrary nothing list. This is what the NFL players think of as the top quarterbacks. So
I feel bad for Tua too. I think Tua is. I mean, his brain was scrambled last year, but I think Tua overall is a decent quarterback, and I think we saw him take steps in the right direction last year. Unfortunately, because of all the brain murmurs he had, we didn't get to really see him play a lot.
True.
But I think that when Tua was on the field, he was doing very well. So
yeah,
I'm excited for him this year. I would put him above somebody like Geno as well.
Agreed. And a concussed Tua may look at that and think that says just one. So he might.
That's true. He's like, I'm the fucking best there is.
That might be okay. All right, come on. Next list. This list is, I don't know this account really, but the JPA football. I thought it was an interesting one, but it was the top wide receiver duos. And I think from a fantasy perspective, we often get so fixated on who's wide receiver one that we fail to look at, okay, what's the total package this offense is going to bring to me? And so I wanted to present this list because I had a thought, knee-jerk reaction. Again, it has, for the people not able to see it, the top 10 wide receiver duos, and I'll just go through the top 5. Number 1, Dolphins with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. 2's Eagles, A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith. 3's the Bengals with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. Seahawks, DK Metcalf and Lockett. And then number 5 were the Bills with Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis. Again, same question posing to the both of you. Lists feel right, feel a little off. Somebody you'd move, somebody feels disrespected.
Yeah, I feel like I'd change a lot. I think I'd probably put Jamar and T. Higgins at the very top of the list, first of all. I like Tyreek and A.J. Brown kind of where they're at, but I don't understand the Stephon Diggs, Gabe Davis at number 5. Stephon Diggs is awesome, but Gabe Davis has the propensity to not catch anything and, have 1 or 2 good games a season. So I don't really understand that. I would put them way lower on the list. And then Jay Jets and Jordan Addison. Okay, we don't know Jordan Addison. He's undersized and kind of slow for his size, so we'll see how that pans out. But I think putting him on a top 10 list right now seems pretty premature.
I think Justin Jefferson definitely carries a lot of the weight and why they made it on the list, I'm sure. I agree. I think I would have Tyreek and Jalen at the top, but right under that is Higgins and Chase, followed by A.J. Brown. I think Gabe Davis is not that great. I think, and hopefully he'll have a bounce back year. And also, I think Mike Evans and Godwin are a little disrespected. I think a lot of people look at the Bucs and they say, well, shit, Baker Mayfield's are starting quarterbacks, so they're not as good. They're still great wide receivers. The fear for me is who's going to be throwing them the ball and can they get them the ball. But aside from that, they have been one of the most dynamic wide receiver duos in the NFL for the last couple of years. So I think having them that low, I would put them a lot closer if we're just looking at it from a wide receiver perspective. Now, if fantasy output, that might be a little bit more accurate.
Correct. Yeah, from a fantasy perspective, you have to look at the trigger man, but I think on pure talent, I think you're absolutely spot on. That stood out to me, and I would also put Jamar and T way up there, but at number 1. But that was just me.
Mm-hmm. I just look at T. Higgins and say, okay, that guy would be the wide receiver 1 on like more than half of the NFL franchises. So having him at 3rd doesn't make a lot of sense to me. You can make that same argument, I guess, for Devonta Smith and Waddle.
You really could.
I think also, T. Higgins tops it.
Quick shout out to this account for calling him T. Huggins, if you can see it on the screen.
I did see that. I didn't know if that was a miss, like if I was just seeing things, but
that does not, as a football player, that would not make me fear him. But
I kind of want to call him T. Huggins though going forward. It's just it's fun.
The Huggy Bear.
Yeah.
All right, last one. Off of the top NFL top 100, we have these are the top players as voted on by the NFL players at each position. QB Pat Mahomes, running back was Josh Jacobs, wide receiver Justin Jefferson, tight end Travis Kelce, and then obviously our O-line, D-line, and defensive backs, which I want to stick with the offense for right now. Gentlemen, any qualms with these being the top players at their respective positions?
Josh Jacobs.
I knew I put this here for Yeti. I wanted to talk about this really quick because I saw this and I was like, man, really? That's who we think is the top running back?
Yeah, Josh Jacobs. It's just because he had the rushing title, but Josh Jacobs is a very good running back, but he benefited this season from a ridiculous workload that he never gets because that coaching staff refuses to play rookie running backs. And that's the only reason Josh Jacobs topped the charts. He's a good running back, but ultimately, if you're looking at pure talent, I think there are several other people you can put above him.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't know if Josh Jacobs, great running back, but number 1, I'm not sure on. Patrick Mahomes easily is the best quarterback in the NFL by and large. Justin Jefferson, best wide receiver. Travis Kelce, I don't know. I mean, obviously he was the best tight end. My only discrepancy with Travis Kelce, and I know you both are Chiefs fans, so bear with me here.
If you say blocking, I might throw up.
No, I wasn't going to say
Okay.
blocking,
gonna
but
say Patrick
you said
Mahomes.
blocking, so we'll go ahead and do that. No, here's the thing. Travis Kelce is one of the best tight ends. The only thing that I don't like about Travis Kelce, he avoids contact, and rightfully so. He's fucking 32 years old. He's trying to stay in the league and win as many championships as he can, so I completely understand it. But if you look at somebody like Mark Andrews, I think Mark Andrews, or, George Kittle's getting a little bit older, but he's still getting it done. Like, they are more athletic than Travis Kelce is. Travis Kelce's just really smart and getting open. And so you got to give it to Travis Kelce, but I think that there's some other tight ends that are athletically better than Kelce. Kelce's just smarter.
I know the the Barstooley boys had a heyday because they don't like the Chiefs. They're obviously like a Bills, a homer. But that was one of their points of contention was he doesn't seek out contact. Well, the best ability is availability, and Kittle isn't available very much. So
no, I like I said, I'm not going to argue that because they're look at Andrews and Kittle last year. They're hurt, but
I was almost like ashamed that they put a Raider as one of the top at their position. So
I think they did it to fuck with Chiefs fans because they didn't want to give you guys too much homage.
It's embarrassing.
Yeah.
Well, thank you boys for humoring me on the lists.
Yeah, no, it was fun. I appreciate you bringing that to the table. Now we're gonna go ahead and do some busting.
Lord have mercy, I'm about to bust.
I want to say it every time.
I love that one.
Oh, that's so great. Okay, so we're gonna talk about mock drafts. We did a mock draft today, gentlemen. We had not only ourselves but some other the Leatherbrains team in there. I'm gonna pull it up here in just a moment, and we're essentially gonna just kind of talk about our draft and talk about why we made some of the decisions we did, and kind of look at it and go from there. So, for those that are listening, we're going to do our very best to try and give you a visual verbally of what's going on. But as I've said, before I pull up this graphic here, what is your guys' strategies going into this year? I kind of touched on mine last week, and I'll give it out again here at the end. But Scotty, for you, going into a PPR redraft league, what are you doing? Like with your first two picks, and obviously this is all pretty subjective as to where you're picking at, but not knowing that information, what are you kind of thinking you want to do with your first two picks?
Yeah, this is a situation where the listeners have to listen to what I say and not what I did, because when you look at my team, you're going to say, well, this doesn't add up. But I tend to side with you, Hunter. I think this is a year where you want to get some elite wide receivers down early. Running backs fade away really quickly in this year's draft, and that's true. But it's also true that wide receivers tend to fade away pretty quickly because everyone's trying to stack up on wide receivers. And I think that there's a lot of talent at the wide receiver position, and there's some value at the running back position that if in an ideal situation, I'm drafting wide receiver to start things off.
Okay. And Alan, what about yourself?
Same. I like you kind of alluded to it. It kind of depends if you're picking at the beginning or kind of middle or towards the end, because I think in most leagues it was pretty much like Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, and then you wanted to sneak in and try to get one of those top running backs that were also going to catch like a CMC. I've done a few drafts recently, and I've pretty much stuck to just getting the top wide receivers. Like I've done wide receiver, unless I was sitting there and McCaffrey happened to be there and I would take him. But I pretty much stuck to wide receiver, especially as it wraps back around. There's just too much value there. Like you can find similar value on running backs that aren't going to really do much in a little bit. So it's kind of, you got to take your medicine on that one. Like I'm not going to have sexy running backs, but my wide receiver room will be solid.
Well, and like I said, there's some good value at the running back position. So you have the opportunity to backfill that spot. I don't think there's anything wrong with grabbing CMC or Austin Eckler, to start things off, but it depends on where you're at, because if you're grabbing them at 1 or 2, that's a lot of wide receivers that are coming off the board before you can fill in that second position. If you're grabbing them at 5 or 6, that's a value, and I would do it. But ultimately, if you have the choice, you're taking Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase to start things off.
So let's talk about stacks for just a second, because it's a very, very popular thing to discuss when it comes to fantasy football. Are you guys very intentional in trying to obtain a stack? And when I say a stack, for those that are not aware, getting a quarterback as well as their wide receiver one. So, for example, Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow is a stack, or Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs. Is that something, those quarterbacks are going pretty early. Are you guys trying to get a stack? Are you interested in stacks? Does it not really matter to you? Or what's your thought on this whole stack thing?
I will if the offense's tendency is to pass more. So if I can get a pass, like a pass heavy offense for something like that, I'll do it. It's not like one of my top tier things to go to. If it falls in my lap, I'll probably do it, but I'll only seek it out if I know they're a pass heavy offense. If they're going to hand it off, then I'm pretty much hamstringing myself from a production standpoint if I have the quarterback and wide receiver that maybe for a week don't produce touchdowns. So that's kind of the thing you roll into. You end up rooting for a team to score a lot, but if they are leaning on their running backs or they tend to default to running it in the red zone, then you kind of hose yourself because then you're missing out on opportunities for two players to score touchdowns that are sitting on the same team.
Sure.
Yeah, I like stacks a lot. I think in a lot of ways they're a fantasy cheat code. So I think that they're worth pursuing. This year's a little bit harder than in years past because the quarterbacks are going so much earlier this season. And I tend when I'm going for a stack, I tend to do it in a pass heavy offense, like Alan said, but with a quarterback and their wide receiver 2. So an example, Joe Burrow, T. Higgins, or Hurts and Devonta Smith. And the reason for that is just based on the values of the picks. You don't have to reach for a wide receiver early. If you get Jamar, then that's great, but that doesn't mean you have to pick up Joe Burrow early because you might be missing out on value on other positions. So if you're able to get, one of the top wide receivers early, and then you can get a value pick at quarterback like Justin Herbert, and then pair that with a value pick of Keenan Allen, that's a stack that could win you a lot of weeks that you don't have to spend up to get. So I think you have to do it intentionally and intelligently, but I think it's worth pursuing if it makes sense in your situation.
Okay, and last part here before we look at our draft that we did, what helps you guys pick between similar players that you're high on? So, you might be high on AJ Brown and Stephon Diggs at the same time, right? And their ADPs are very, very similar. So what are you looking for in players that, are in your similar ADP groups? Like what do you just have my guys that you really like, or like what are you doing to differentiate? I'd rather have AJ Brown than Stephon Diggs, or I would rather have Devontae Smith over T. Higgins because they're kind of going around that same time.
I think it goes back to tendencies for me. And obviously I know we all watch a lot of football, so we kind of know, like I put myself watching them on TV, like what's realistically about to happen here. And while I love like AJ a lot, I look at other options that are on that team. You have a very capable Dallas Goedert, Devonta Smith. You actually have a quarterback that can run and is jacked and can go pick up what he needs on there. And so there's a lot more options and variations on what I think could happen versus a Stephon Diggs where I know Allen, if he's rolling out, while certainly he'll run, I know he's looking at Diggs. So I know when I'm watching TV, if that ball goes up, there's a high chance that's going to Diggs. And that's kind of it's kind of a gut feeling, and it may not bear out that way, and they may be very similar and it may not matter. But I think for me, that's kind of what I look at. Like what do I feel like is going to happen? What have I seen happen time over time with these offenses, and who can develop and who do I think is going to get the more opportunities?
Yeah.
Is there you have anything to add to that, Scotty?
Well, yeah, I just want to agree, first of all, that it is kind of a gut feeling, especially when you're looking at the top tier guys where, no one's going to blame you for going one way or the other. But the other thing to think about is just the totality of the situation. Not only are they the number one target, but are they an offense that's going to be throwing the ball a lot? Are they going to be down at all and they're going to have to throw the ball? Are they going to be up a lot and run the ball more often? How's their schedule look? Are they playing a lot of tough secondaries? Are they playing a lot of tough front fours? So you kind of have to look at the totality of the situation. But ultimately, I kind of agree. At the end of the day, you just got to go with your gut and hope it pans out, because especially in the early rounds, you're not going to be blamed one way or another by choosing one guy over the other. You just kind of have to feel it deep in your bones.
Oh, I love feeling things deep in my bones.
Speaking of feeling, before we get into who we picked, Matt was definitely not feeling his team as he was making the pick.
There was some words exchanged, mostly hateful words with coming from Scotty on how much he disliked his team. So let's look at it, Scotty.
Well, you gave me the worst draft position.
Well, I didn't give you any draft position. I clicked random, and this is what it gave us.
Yeah,
so as I mentioned, it wasn't just us. It wasn't just computers. There's a couple of computer picks in here, but we also had our intern here at Leather Brains in there with us, as well as Yeti partook in the fun, and another friend of ours. So there was a couple live people that were drafting as well. But I'm going to highlight ours, and we're going to talk about ours because we're here and we're doing a podcast. So I had the 2nd overall pick. Alan had the 5th, and Matt had the 10th overall pick. So let's get into it. I'll start out. I took Jamar Chase at the 102, and then I took Jalen Waddle at the 209. As I mentioned, I want that wide receiver stack. And if for those of you who are looking at my team, you'll notice I didn't even take a running back until the 5th round. I think there's a lot of comparable running backs in the later rounds that are just as usable. Now, they're not your Christian McCaffrey or your Austin Eckler, but I'm fine with that because I think I'm going to get a lot of value out of my wide receiver room, and that's where I really want to focus on in my draft if I can. So getting Jamar Chase and Jalen Waddle. Jamar Chase is a top-tier wide receiver. Jalen Waddle finishes wide receiver 8 last year. I'm totally fine with that, and I'm really happy with my first 2 picks. Alan, you took Tyreek Hill and Garrett Wilson. How did you feel about that, and did you like the way that your team's shaping up thus far?
I did, and it's funny because Mahomes went right after that, but I felt like you said, it's important to get the top wide receivers, and I think Wilson's going to benefit from having Rodgers on that team. I think I like the Jets a lot, and then obviously having somebody like Tyreek who can score a touchdown at any moment is very important. But it's funny because we had similar strategies, except you went tight end there in the 3rd, and I snuck in a running back and then went right back to wide receiver. So it's like we had the same thought. It was like, sure, I'll fill another need here. And now I'm back on the wide receiver train.
Yeah, and we'll get to the 3rd and 4th here in just a moment. But you mentioned tight end, so let's just briefly talk about this. I'm going to ask you, both Chiefs fans, I'm going to ask both of you to put the bias aside as much as humanly possible here, because I did take a tight end in the 3rd round, and it was Mark Andrews. However, I want to talk about Travis Kelce. Travis Kelce right now is going in the 1st round. We know that the tight end position is a much more difficult position to fill because when you have one of those elite top tier tight ends, you get wide receiver production out of them, but they're in your tight end position. So it's a huge benefit for fantasy football. Do you guys think Travis Kelce should be going in the 1st round, and would you take him in the 1st round if you could?
Yes, he should be going in the 1st round, and would I take him? It depends on where I am. I think I would not blame you for taking him from the 5th pick on. I think in the first 4 picks, there are better options. From the 5th pick on, I do not blame you for taking him. Personally, I would take people like Tyreek Hill, Austin Eckler, Cooper Kupp over him. But right in that range, I think is perfectly reasonable, just given the cheat code that he is at the tight end position. He adds value in a spot where there's very, very little value and gives you a hand up every single week, or a leg up every single week. So I think he definitely deserves to go in the 1st round. And I would say anywhere from the 5th pick on is perfectly reasonable.
Mm-hmm. I think, Scotty, you said it best early on, like nobody's going to fault you if you do it. But I'm going to say something here that I don't think Slaps was ready to hear. I wouldn't take him. And that is more so because the Brainiacs have to remember, this is still gambling. And you have to understand that there are inherent risks of certain players. And the one thing that has always been good for Kels is that he has been healthy, and he's been dinged up now and again, but he is getting older. And at some point that production will drop off. And I think for me, it's like, I'd rather stick to getting like a Diggs or an AJ Brown right there more so than I would have probably leaped at a chance to get Kelce, because I do think Mark Andrews is going to be capable of putting up stats. I do think like a Darren Waller can do it. I do think a Kittle, if he can remain healthy, can do it. And then even at the very end, I won't spoil anybody else's draft, but I think there's a lot of value there where you could probably get some production. So for me, while I understand he would be, because he shakes out to be like a top 10 wide receiver, you don't want to be that guy getting stuck the bag where you see Kelce's demise on your team, because that could ruin you, overall, because you're taking your 1st round on him.
So go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I agree with Alan. I wouldn't take Kelce in the 1st round. Now, if it was a 2nd round, I think if you've already secured either your top running back or your top wide receiver, that's when I'd be more inclined to try and take him. But as Alan mentioned, I think I'd rather have Diggs or Brown solely because it's not as big of a risk to take. So you could hit, but in the same respect, you might not, because he is older, and when you take him at the tight end position, yes, it is an advantage, but you also limit yourself in another position by taking him in the 1st round. So that's my look at it. I don't think anybody's going to blame you for taking him in the 1st round, but I also stray away from that because I think you can still find tight end production in other places.
So here's the argument for it. And like, we all agree, no one's going to blame you for taking him in the first round. I think it's a solid pick. But when you're looking at tight end production, especially in the later rounds, because I'm someone who waits on tight end quite a bit, what I'm looking for is a tight end who has the capability of being the number 1 or the number 2 target on their offense. Darren Waller is a big target for me this year for that reason. Whether or not he stays healthy, obviously that's a risk. But when he's on the field, he is going to be, a top tier target for Daniel Jones. Travis Kelce fills the number 1 wide receiver role on the best offense in the league with the best quarterback in the league. So to me, it's perfectly reasonable to take him as basically your wide receiver 1. I don't see it as a big difference from taking, someone like Jamar Chase or someone like Tyreek Hill. You're taking an elite wide receiver 1, and you're just doing that with Travis Kelce. The added risk of his age is why he's going between 5th through 12 instead of 1 through 4. So that's why I think it's perfectly reasonable to take him in the first round.
Well, then I will let you take him in our redraft leagues, and I will avoid him in the first round.
I'll stay with slaps.
Okay. Scotty, you have A.J. Brown and Saquon Barkley as your first 2 picks. Like I said, you were in the 10th round, so you got the grab and then the grab right after that. How'd you feel about those picks?
I was fine. I was fine with those. Saquon, I think, is a reasonable option early in the second round, and A.J. Brown I like a lot on an elite offense with an elite quarterback as the number 1 target. Obviously, A.J. Brown could have a better situation if he wasn't in a 1A, 1B, type of offense or type of role. But ultimately, this was not the point of the draft where I started wanting to jump off a building. So
we're getting.
I was going to ask, at what round do we want to zero in as the dumpster fire beginning?
I kind of want to. We'll go every 2 rounds here because I'm excited to see where the drop is.
You're not going to have to wait long.
Okay. Okay, Alan, we're going to go back over to you for 3rd and 4th. So in your 3rd round pick, you had the 305. You took Ramondre, and then on the loop, you took Keenan Allen there. So you've got 3 wide receivers and 1 running back in the first 4 rounds. You feeling pretty comfortable with this?
I am. I think for where I was picking and what was falling around me, I knew I went to at least get 1 running back and kind of give myself some production. I didn't want to have like a glaring hole. Because you still have to. You can only start so many guys. So at this point, I was more thinking of layering in my team. And then Keenan Allen, as long as he can stay healthy, even though he's older, obviously Justin's going to be launching it. So I was looking, generally my theme when I'm looking at players is how likely are they to receive the football over somebody else. And so through my first 4 picks, these are guys that are probably going to receive the football very early for their team. And that's kind of what I look at.
Well, and I did the same thing. I took Mark Andrews with my 3rd pick and Hopkins with my 4th. And Hopkins especially is kind of where I shared that same mentality. Much like Keenan Allen, he's an older wide receiver. He struggled with some drugs last year and was suspended. But then he came back and he was the wide receiver 1. He filled in that role very well. Obviously, he's with a different team now. He's with Tennessee, and there's a lot of argument that could be had there. But we saw A.J. Brown be very successful with Ryan Tannehill as his quarterback. So we don't know if Ryan Tannehill is going to be the quarterback. I'm assuming at this current juncture, he still is the starting quarterback for the Titans. And if Hopkins can reclaim some of that role that A.J. Brown once was, I think the value is going to be great for him. And then, of course, Mark Andrews, as I mentioned, we all know who Marky Mark is and what he means for that Ravens offense. So I was pretty excited to get him as well. So I still don't have any running backs at the end of at my 409. So it's somewhat alarming, and we'll get to that on the turnaround. But I guess I'll do it right now. Aaron Jones and James Conner were my 5th and 6th round picks. I'm very happy with that, to be honest with you. I think James Conner's a little underrated right now, or undervalued, excuse me. The Cardinals aren't going to be good this year, and somebody's going to have to move that ball. That's James Conner. He's in a 3-down back. He's shown that he can, have some PPR value as well. So I really like that. And then Aaron Jones, of course, we all know Aaron Jones. His situation really hasn't changed other than he has a quarterback change, but it's still him. And then you have A.J. Dillon back there. I'm not super concerned about it. So I think for those being my 2 running backs off the board, I'm fine with that because I have so much value at that wide receiver and tight end position.
I think that's the strategy that if you're drafting or you're going through this, you have to look at, because you're going to have to make a decision. Am I going to be really strong at running back, which is really hard to do because it falls off damn near instantly. And even if you do get one of the top running backs, you pretty much have to go right back to a wide receiver because the value is going to change so frequently. So I think when you're defending taking running backs there, I think it's perfect because you're not. I don't think running backs are necessarily going to carry teams at all this year. Like
I don't think they are. They didn't last year.
No, they're going to be good supplemental pieces, which is crazy to say, but you really want, especially in PPR, like who's just going to like get their hands on the ball sometime. Like that's all you can hope for. And then you're going to watch the game on Sundays. Like I just kind of want to see their name sneak a touchdown in, and then I'll be good.
Yeah, for sure. And you know, you took your second running back in the 5th round. You took Travis Etienne, followed by Scary Terry in your 6th round pick. How are you thinking and feeling about this?
Good, same. I think for me it was I like the Jags offense. Can you guys still hear me?
Yep, we got you.
Sorry. I took I just like the Jags offense. I think they really started clicking at the end of the year, and he's going to get a lot of touches. I also like the wide receivers being on that team. Backs off those safeties a little bit. Opens up those linebackers a little bit too for him to catch out of the backfield if needed. And then Scary Terry, I know we just put an article out there recently on him. I think there's just a lot of value there. I think he's underrated, and I think he's just a good spot to get him.
Is there any concern with Tank Bigsby, the other running back that the Jaguars drafted this year? Is there some concern there that ETN might have less value?
I think across the board, you could say that for everybody. Like every running back, all the way up to even Christian McCaffrey, there's question marks. You can say, are you concerned with Eli Mitchell? Are you concerned that McCaffrey's not going to start all year? There's so much across the board. I think it's things you're going to have to be willing to live with the whole year.
Okay.
So yes, but no.
And then Scotty, we'll get back over to you here. You had Josh Allen and DK Metcalf as your 3rd and 4th pick. Has the train ran off the tracks yet? Or are you still feeling okay?
Well, it started to here because the thing is that at the 10th pick, I haven't done any mocks at the end of the round. And what I learned is that it seemed like everyone on the board, the people who had the best value at the position were people I'm not necessarily high on or who do not adhere to my draft strategy. And the people who I liked were always too far for me to justify reaching for. So I felt like every pick from here on out was like a compromise with myself, which is not where you want to be when you're drafting. So I took Josh Allen. I normally do not take a quarterback this early. Obviously he's a great quarterback and I'm happy to have him on the team. But, looking at the picks who went right after him, you have Breece Hall, who obviously is a good running back, but has some question marks. And not only that, but there are a million new weapons on this offense and a new quarterback. So we don't necessarily know how that's going to pan out. So I don't necessarily want to take the risk there unless I'm getting a value for it. You have someone like Calvin Ridley, who's got a lot of question marks as well. Najee Harris, who's like the least efficient running back to ever play football. Joe Mixon is one name that I considered, but again, you're reaching for him to get him there. And he's got,
I wouldn't say that's that bad though.
No, I don't disagree.
I don't think anybody he went 4 picks later. I don't think anybody would have faulted you for sliding into Joe Mixon if you
those
wanted
were
him.
the two people that I was really the 3 because I took DK, but those are the people that I was really struggling with. Joe Mixon was the one that I was really considering. But again, I didn't feel great about the options that I had at this position.
So a question for you guys right now. Do you think sometimes we get too, we're in it every day. Do you think sometimes we get too wrapped up in the quote unquote value of like, oh, I should take a guy here because of this, and more so like, hey, if I really want this guy and I think he's going to produce, I don't really give a shit. Like, I'm just going to go grab him.
It's funny you mention that because we've been playing this for a long time now, and we have been in the fantasy football, like deep in the weeds for quite a while. This is the first year where I'm finding myself actually taking a step back and saying, I don't care where their ADP is. I do a little bit, but not for myself, but because I'm trying to game plan. Can I wait one more round and get this guy in the next round? But it's not me necessarily wanting to make a reach. It's me looking at other people's teams and saying, yep, I can wait another round on a quarterback because, and as you and I will talk about, you look at this draft here, and for those that are able to see the draft, if you look, you and I are the only ones that didn't draft a quarterback until very late. Everybody else had a quarterback by the 6th round except for you and I popped on the 9th. So I looked at it and I said, I don't need to take a quarterback here because nobody else is going to be grabbing a quarterback. They're going to be trying to fill in other positions. And so all I was doing was seeing, is Allen going to grab a quarterback or not? And if he doesn't grab a quarterback here, I've got time. So that you start playing the game at a different level in that way, where I don't necessarily care about their ADP and where they are falling at. If I have a guy and I want a guy, I'm going to get him. Now I'm just taking the risk. Can I get my other guy? or do I value one over the other based upon their ADP? So,
and I think that mindset really applies the further down the draft board you get. I think, ADP is a lot more relevant in the first few rounds than it is later on. And it's just because, at a certain point, they're up there for a reason. But as you get down the draft, I definitely found myself reaching a lot more, or what people would consider reaching. But, once you get past round 5, round 6, you're talking about every single player has question marks. So you just have to look at their situation and take your guy. But I want to talk for a second about DK Metcalf, because this is a guy who last year we talked about a lot being a stupid pick to make.
Weren't you like a big Tyler Lockett fan for a while?
Well, okay. So going into last season, none of us were confident at all in this offense. We were saying, okay, if you really want a piece of the Seattle offense, why not take Tyler Lockett, who gets targeted just as much, and you can get him 5 rounds later? It's the same argument I make this year for Jahan Dotson. Why are you drafting Scary Terry in the 4th or 5th round when you can wait till round 8 and get Jahan Dotson, who is arguably just as efficient if he stays on the field the whole year? And yeah, sorry, I don't mean you.
Fine, I'm going to pick somebody out that you picked. Jerry Jeudy.
Hold on, we're going to do that the rest of the episode because I made shitty picks all day. But DK Metcalf this year in particular, I think the addition of JSN is going to impact Tyler Lockett way more than DK Metcalf. And this is an offense now that has proven they can be competitive. So getting DK Metcalf at this position where, again, my options are people like Breece Hall, people like Najee Harris that I'm not overly excited about unless I'm getting a deal on them. I think DK Metcalf was a perfectly safe pick here, though I'm not real excited about it.
Okay, yeah, I actually agree with you there. I think if I was to be concerned about anybody, it would be Lockett with JSN going there. So I don't hate the DK Metcalf pick this year. I really don't. So you did Josh Allen and DK Metcalf in the 3rd and the 4th. In the 5th and the 6th round, you did Dameon Pierce and Jerry Jeudy. What do you think about that? Is this has the train left the tracks in the wrong direction yet?
This feels on fire to me already.
Yeah, well, it is what it is. I am happy to have Jerry Jeudy on my team. Would I have liked to get him at a better value than I did? Yes, but I am happy to have Jerry Jeudy on my team. I think if you watched him play last year, he is the definitive wide receiver 1 in this offense that has only up to go. So I think Jerry Jeudy is going to be just fine, and I'm happy to have him. Dameon Pierce, I have a lot more question marks with, and it's because of the addition of Devin Singletary into that backfield. I listen to a lot of fantasy podcasts in addition to our own, and it seems like all of these fantasy gurus are all on the same page that, Dameon Pierce, man, he's going to be just fine. His only competition is Devin Singletary. And we ignore the fact that Devin Singletary is the best competition that Dameon Pierce has seen in his own backfield since he entered the league.
You don't think that's Rex Burkhead?
No, I love Rex Burkhead, but no, it's not. Devin Singletary was still remarkably efficient as a runner. He is a great pass blocker. He's a great player. And so I don't think he's going to take over the running back 1 position, but I think Devin Singletary is going to be on the field a lot. And so ultimately I'm betting on talent here that I do think Dameon Pierce is the better back. So I think he's going to see a lot more of the valuable touches, but I am concerned about that pick quite a bit.
Yeah, that to me, I would rather have, just looking at this, J.K. Dobbins was still on the board, Alexander Madison was still on the board, and Alvin Kamara were still on the board. I think I would rather have probably maybe not Kamara, even maybe then still. I don't know. This is where you're kind of getting a little bit of purgatory issues, and I understand that. I'm high on James Conner, so I was fine getting him at the value that I did at the end of that round. But understandably so. Jerry Jeudy, I like Jerry Jeudy a lot, but let's go on to 7 and 8 here because we are still wrapping. So you have Christian Kirk and Pat Freiermuth there at the 7th and 8th turn. What are you thinking? Have you hated your team yet, or what's going on? I want to get to the point where you gave up.
I don't even want to look at my draft anymore. I just want to really hone in on where he started to get depressed and we started to get like, I hate my team.
Yeah, we're trying to really get you in a negative state.
Some insight. The moment I took Josh Allen, I was no longer on the rails. I was now in no man's land in terms of my normal draft strategy, just trying to figure out what the fuck to do because I was lost. And so from the 3rd round on, I was lost. But I was trying to just find the best values that I could. Christian Kirk, people are writing him off a little bit because of Calvin Ridley, but Christian Kirk ultimately is a perfectly fine wide receiver. Getting him in the 6th round of drafts, the 7th round of drafts, you're getting value there. So I think that's perfectly fine. And this is an up and coming offense. I always want to buy in on up and coming offenses. And so I'm happy with that. And Pat Freiermuth, I think I took him, there's a lot of value later in the rounds in tight end. You guys both, took some good, or Allen in particular with Darren Waller, Cole Kmet, not to spoiler alert, but
Damn.
Pat Freiermuth is the last one in a tier for me. And so I am happy getting Pat Freiermuth. He was the wide receiver 2 on this team. I think George Pickens is overrated and his hype is only going up because of all of his spectacular catches in camp. Ultimately, he doesn't draw any targets. So Pat Freiermuth is going to be the beneficiary of that. And so this is another sort of, offense that we expect to take a step forward. I think Pat Freiermuth is going to perform. And so that's why I took the chance on him when I did.
Damn, Matt.
He was the wide receiver 2 for the Steelers last year, so we'll see if that changes, but I like the Muth a lot. Alan, we're going to go over to you. Darren Waller and Hollywood Brown were your 7th and 8th round picks. How you feeling? You like those?
Again, same thing. It's like who's apt to get the targets? Who do I like? I think Waller in that offense could succeed. I think you could see a theme here. When I took a guy that I wasn't like 100% sold on, I generally paired it with somebody that I could easily swap them out with, or there was production where I felt like I could get equal value if things weren't panning out. So I did that with Waller, and then Matt already said Kmet. Like, I wanted to make sure that I kind of had some insurance there if the Waller injury train continues or it doesn't quite work out. But then Hollywood Brown was a stash. I like my wide receivers a lot so far, and so really this was like when K1 comes back and
you get a wide receiver 1,
I get another one. And so It is a bet, it is a gamble, but if they do hit it off, then second half of the year I'm going to be rolling with a problem, or I have some good trade bait with some other wide receivers that if I need to fill my running back room, because my running back room is hurting.
Yeah, I will say I like that a lot. I like the Hollywood Waller. If he works, but Hollywood Brown, I mean, he was the wide receiver 1 for the first 6 weeks without DeAndre Hopkins on the field for the Cardinals, and he was a top 5 wide receiver fantasy football wise. So love those picks. I, at the 7th and 8th round, took Cam Akers and Mr. James Cook. My running back room was pretty small at that point. It was James Conner and Aaron Jones, so I really wanted to shore up some guys. Cam Akers, I actually really like Cam Akers. He's somebody that for a 7th round pick is just a steal in my opinion.
Same.
Sean McVay, as Scotty has said multiple times on this podcast, likes using a one running back room guy, and I think that's Cam Akers this year. We saw Cam Akers come on the scene after we thought he was going to get cut. And at the end of the year, he was very, very usable for the Rams. So I think that's tremendous value. And James Cook, he is the starting running back for the Bills. I like that. He's got PPR value. They're getting him involved in the passing game as well. So I really wanted to shore up my running back room and make sure that if one of my running backs go down, I still have some depth there with starting running backs.
So slaps, I want to, because I remember this part of the draft, and I had Akers kind of highlighted because I was like, if he's still there on the comeback, I didn't think you were going to go grab another one. And so I was like, damn it. Because I wanted to take Akers there. That kind of forced my hand. I was like, all right, well, I really like Waller here, so I'm going to go there. But I agree with you. I'm very high on Akers. I think that Rams offense in general, pulled hamstrings aside and all this other stuff that that offense is facing. I think we forget at how good they were, and they still have the same head coach. If they have a healthy Stafford, if they have a healthy, there's a lot to like there. And I feel like last year kind of people are, well, it didn't work last year, so I'm moving on. And so I like Akers a lot there.
Well, it brings up the good point. Do you think when it comes to drafting in general, it's what have you done for me lately mentality, as far as we start to look at last season and we write some of these people off for that very reason, do you think?
I think it depends on the scope you're looking at. Like if head coaching hasn't changed, if it was just injury, if it was, because some teams just have an injury bug. A case of that too is like the Ravens. Like, is that going to happen again? Are they going to get back on the track? But they also have a change there in the head coaching or in the coaching room. So you have to balance it. I think people that don't play regularly or don't pay attention or aren't listening to this podcast or aren't following us on social media, I think what you miss is what's kind of happening. Who's coming back? What do you need to pay attention to? So I think a lot of these redrafts are just indicative of that, though, of what you said, like, what have you done for me lately? But I think you have to look at the whole situation when you think about it.
Sure. 9th and 10th round for myself, I finally took my first quarterback, being Deshaun Watson. Thank you. Hold the applause, Alan. I think Deshaun Watson is going to come back and be usable. He is removed. I don't want to rehash everything because I think I say it once a week on this podcast, but I think he's going to be really usable. And then I went and got Elijah Moore to pair with Deshaun Watson for my 10th round pick at the end of the 10th there. I like Elijah Moore. He's one of those guys that has fallen tremendously, and I think he is such a juicy wide receiver too, with some great upside. I think he's going to be the wide receiver too for the Browns. A lot of people are obviously Amari Cooper is the wide receiver one. I think Elijah Moore takes over from Donovan Peoples-Jones as the solidified wide receiver two. I just think, there's a lot of camp hype about him. Obviously, the Browns traded for him. There was a lot of tension with him and the Jets last season. I think he's a great slot guy for Deshaun Watson, and I think that they're going to connect quite often. So for end of the 10th round, I love that pick for hopefully a very solid wide receiver too. So going over to you, Alan, for your 9th and 10th pick, you got Javonte Williams as your third running back off the board, and then you went and got Zay Flowers in the middle of the 10th.
This is where we start to gamble, boys. Javonte, I need him to come back and be healthy and contribute to that room. Obviously, that offense was a little wonky last year. Got to pray that they kind of figure it out, which I think they will. I think Sean Payton is going to figure out how to unlock a little bit more. Do I think they're going to be high flying? No. But again, they also play in cold weather. That ball, gets a little sticky or gets a little slippery and you want to keep it on the ground. I get it. So that's a gamble move. I'm just really gambling that he comes back healthy. My running back room rounds it out. I didn't take another running back. That was kind of it. And then with Zay, again, it's funny how there's a clustering of those wide receivers in a group. If you look at ADP, like all the Ravens wide receivers, if you don't include Mark Andrews, who I think is the wide receiver one, they're all kind of clustered. And so it was just kind of picking young guy. I've heard a lot of stuff about him in camp. They seem to be developing a rapport, and I was like, this is a good spot, especially since my wide receiver room is already so heavy.
No, I think Zay Flowers is the wide receiver one for that offense. A lot of people are saying OBJ is coming, but OBJ is getting old, and I think OBJ will draw some defenses, and I think that will only benefit Zay Flowers. So I love that pick at the middle of the 10th. Scotty, we're going over to you. 9th. At the end of the 9th round, you took Jahan Dotson. Beginning of the 10th, you took Brandon Cooks. I am not surprised by the Dotson pick. I think you're a Dotson homer after that wonderful article that you wrote, and you brought a lot of good points to the table with that article. So if you haven't gone and read it yet, go to leatherbrains.com and check it out. It is a wonderfully written piece that really explains why Jahan Dotson is a great value pick in comparison to Scary Terry. So sorry, Alan. But and then
I'm just catching strays over here because Scott doesn't like his team, so he's like, oh,
somebody's got to
bringing you down, bro.
Hurt people.
And then you got Brandon Cooks, who I think is pretty well too. Cowboys wide receiver too. What are you thinking? How are you feeling when we got to this point?
Yeah, I was pretty happy with this little turn here because Jahan Dotson in the 9th round is a tremendous value. If this guy stays healthy on the field, I've said it before, I'll say it again, it would not surprise me if he's the wide receiver one on the Commanders offense. Obviously, the Commanders offense leaves a lot to be desired given all the changes, including at the quarterback position. But, you're getting potentially a wide receiver one for a team that's going to be starting every week, and you got him in the 9th round. So that's a good deal. I love Jahan Dotson as a talent, so I'm targeting him in almost every draft. I would take him as early as the 8th round, and getting him in the 9th, I'm real happy with. And then Brandon Cooks, Yeti isn't here to talk shit about the Cowboys, and I'm on board with talking shit about the Cowboys, but Brandon Cooks is in the best situation that he's been in a very long time, and he has managed to be a productive wide receiver in way worse situations. He got an upgraded offense. He got an upgraded quarterback. I am perfectly happy taking Brandon Cooks this late. I think that's a bet that is very likely to pay off.
One of the more frustrating things I won't say it's frustrating, but one of the more curious things, Brandon Cooks, no matter where he goes, no matter what NFL team he plays for, he still finds himself having tremendous value. He's done it pretty consistently. Now, very obviously, CeeDee Lamb is a wide receiver one in this offense, but Brandon Cooks was the wide receiver one for the Texans for a couple years, the Texans were in bad shape, but he still found fantasy outbar usage in the Texans offense, which was very shocking. So I love him where he's currently at. I like that pick a lot. Let's look at your 11th and 12th round picks. You took OBJ and Devin A-Chain. Sweet ass name. Mm-hmm. How are you liking about that? Are you good with those picks, or you wish you would have went in a different direction, or how do you feel?
This is the point in the draft where I started taking shots in the dark. So, OBJ is a player that I'm not super high on. I'm not really expecting him to come back and look like his former self, but he's also a player you can get in the 11th round that has a lot of upside. If he comes back and looks as good as he once did, or almost as good as he once did, you're getting a tremendous value there. So I'm taking a shot in the dark on OBJ, again, on an offense that looks to be improving a lot this season. And then Devon Achane, this is just a guy that I think fits his offense really well. So nobody expects him to come out and be a bell cow, but I think over the course of the season, the likelihood that he sees more and more time as weeks go by is pretty high because they love speed demons on this offense. They want to be able to run the ball around the defense, not through the defense, and Devon Achane can do that. So I'm taking a bet on him at this round, even though it may or may not pan out.
Is any of this factor in? He just has a cool name.
He does have a cool name. That
10% pick choice.
I mean, I'd probably give it like 5%. If his name was Billy Bob Thornton, wow, that's a pretty cool name too.
That's a pretty cool name.
When did we get the dumpster fire? Was it before this or
it was
after?
Josh Allen?
Josh Allen.
Josh Allen.
Okay, he already said. I'm trying to remember in the chat when he was like just.
Oh, I think it was like round 5.
I think it was earlier. I think it was taking a quarterback in the 3rd round.
I almost called your wife just to make sure you were doing okay because it was.
I was gonna send you to rehab.
Alan, you finally took a quarterback in round 11. You took Tua Tagovailoa, and in the 12th round, you took Cole Kmet. So that was your second tight end off the board in the 12th round, and your first quarterback in the 11th round. Are you pretty comfortable with that, or how are you feeling?
At this point, I think I felt like I was getting more value on some of my position players throughout the draft. And I keep looking at the quarterback list. I think we kind of play the same way where I look and see who's available, who still needs a quarterback, who's going to pick. And then I just kind of went for it. If you look right before that, the auto draft picked 2 quarterbacks that I was also like, maybe I will, maybe I won't. But then when they took them, I'm like, all right, well, I kind of have to take one here because I don't know what auto draft's going to do, which when you're playing fantasy, you're going to run into guys if you're not in like a serious committed league where they just like don't show up, and auto draft is just going to severely punch you right in the nuts.
Your whole draft strategy. It's happened before.
So it does. And there's no rhyme or reason to the auto draft sometimes either. So I took Tua, I paired him with Tyreek. I felt like the way I look at quarterbacks myself,
baby.
The way I look at it is if you value the wide receivers on that team so highly, somebody's got to throw them the ball. And I look at then go take that quarterback. And so for me, it was Waddle and Hill. Cool. If somebody's going to get them the ball, it's going to be Tua. I'll go ahead and take him here. And then Kmet, I alluded to it earlier. It's just really insurance for Waller. I needed a good, solid tight end again, just in case something happened to him or it didn't pan out.
No, the Tua pick is something. Tua is my late round target, and Watson was there, and it just the rushing upside for what he could be and has been historically was too juicy for me to pass up. But I truthfully was thinking at the time Watson, Tua was there, and so was Kirk Cousins, and I was like, Tua would probably be the one I would want just because. I mean, you look at it. Tyreek Hill went in the 1st round. Jalen Waddle went at the end of the 2nd round. Like both those guys were top 10 wide receivers last year. Somebody has to get them the ball. It's going to be Tua. And I looked up the stats and I did the homework on it. Tua would have finished as quarterback 6 last year if he was healthy and he continued his average that he currently had. So getting him in the 11th round is wonderful. I love that. And we'll move over to me here. I got Tank Bigsby in the 12th round and Jamal Williams in the 11th round. Jamal Williams, wide receiver for the Lions. I love Dan Campbell. And I wanted to get a piece of this offense. He's suspended for the first 6 weeks, which I think is kind of why we've seen his ADP fall so much, but there's really high expectations for this kid when he comes back. He was a 1st round pick last year. He didn't really play till the end of the year because he had a torn ACL, and now he is back and then suspended. So when he comes back, it could be fruitful, but we're getting to that point. Tank Bigsby, I took in the end of the 12th round. You're starting to grab handcuff players. You're starting for running backs. You're starting to grab wide receivers that hopefully will have some sort of value for you. So I'm good with drafting Jamal Williams, having him chill on the bench for a while and maybe find some usability down the line. And same thing for Tank Bigsby. He's ETN's kind of handcuff-esque, and we'll see what happens. So I was totally fine getting him there. And then I will round this off. My 13th and 14th round picks. I got Daniel Jones as a second quarterback as somewhat of a relief to Deshaun Watson in case Deshaun Watson doesn't do anything. I don't see that happening, but Daniel Jones was certainly usable with his rushing upside, so I was totally fine getting a second quarterback there that I can just hang on to just in case. And then Sam Laporta, he's a rookie tight end, also for the Lions. I'm a Lions homer this year. I'm a Dan Campbell supporter. Sam Laporta has had a lot of camp hype, and TJ Hawkinson's not there for the Lions anymore, so I'm hoping Laporta can get some usage.
I love the Laporta pick. I've taken him in a few leagues because everything you read about how he's produced, how he's looked in camp, he looks like a ready-made NFL tight end, which isn't shocking. Iowa does that, and he's going to be the starting tight end. You got a starting tight end at the very last round.
What makes me really sad is the fact that in our Dynasty League, I had the chance to take him, almost took him, and I took Brock Purdy, the pick before.
Didn't I take him?
No, you did take him, but I had the opportunity to take him, almost took him, and didn't take him because Brock Purdy was sitting in the third round. I didn't need a quarterback. I didn't really even need a tight end, but Laporta is just a great pick that I really wanted, and I part of me regrets it. So we'll see what happens with Brock Purdy, but
I can give him back to you for a price.
See, I don't know if I want to pay that. That's the problem.
I'll broker the deal.
All right, get the paperwork started. Alan, your last two picks, Geno Smith and Rashee Rice for the Chiefs. I think it makes sense. You know, Tua's got a scrambled brain. You needed some quarterback insurance there, so that's kind of how I look at it, and it sounds like you agree with that. And then Rashee Rice, your Chiefs homer, question mark? You kind of want a piece just in case?
So my logic there was I don't ever intend on starting him. I hope he pops off early and I can trade him. Like if I was in this league, I would totally use him as trade bait to secure another running back somewhere so I can get some more actual touches in my running back room. That was my only thought, was if he does show enough, or if they don't have tape on him and he pops off with Mahomes, I can trade him. I would never intend on starting him on this team, more of just trade bait. And then you're right. If Tua's brain goes full scramble, same thought. Somebody's got to get DK the ball. Somebody's got to get Lockett the ball. Somebody's got to get JSN the ball. So I'm going to take a quarterback that, they think is going to do that. Yeah.
And it's very curious because you look at some of these quarterbacks and like Geno, I think was a top 10 quarterback last year. Daniel Jones was a top 10 quarterback last year from fantasy football, and they're not in the top 10 right now. So it's not saying that they're going to get back into the top 10, but like they've done it before, so I think it's an interesting time for quarterbacks in fantasy football to draft, because in years previous we sat there at the top of the cliffs and said don't draft a quarterback early, the point disparity is not worth it. Last year, if you did, it was worth it, but there was a severe drought in production in touchdown and offenses in general in the NFL, and so it made it that much more valuable to have a good quarterback. I'd like to see offenses in the NFL get closer to where they were in the past, where it was more explosive and we had more production out of them, and I think this is going to be a very interesting year to see, was this just an outlier or was this a trend towards the future? And so that's kind of what I'm interested in seeing this year.
Well, Scotty, before we move on real quick, this is why I say, my draft went off the rails when I took Josh Allen, because I looked later in the drafts when you're getting Deshaun Watson and Tua and Daniel Jones in the last few rounds of the draft, man, that's great value. Especially I look at someone like Daniel Jones, who not only was able to finish as a top 10 quarterback last year, but has rushing upside on an offense that's only improved. So if you're able to get him in the second to last round of your drafts, you don't need to take a top tier quarterback. You can fill that value at other positions. So I just think that's an awesome pick. And Geno Smith is the same way. I mean, you're getting a quarterback in the second to last round he's surrounded by weapons on an offense that's proven they can be competitive. So again, I just am still not really a big fan of taking early quarterbacks. And I think this explains it perfectly well.
Yeah, and that was kind of my mentality going into this, was I don't want to take a quarterback because I think there's going to be enough value in those later round guys, and it proved to be fruitful in this instance, and I think that you're just going to continue to see that. So I'm still not in on the buy a quarterback early trend, and I'm tending to still try and stay away from it if possible. Now, if we're talking the fourth round and somebody like Jalen Hurts might still be there, yeah, we would definitely consider it, but where their current ADP is and where they're kind of going, I think I'd rather wait and get a quarterback later, because there's some of these positions are still much more fruitful in my starting lineup than a 3 or 4 point swing in a quarterback on a week-to-week basis. So, Scotty, we're going to end off with you here. You had Rashad Bateman at the end of the 13th and Deontay Foreman at the start of the 14th. What are you thinking?
Bateman's a shot in the dark. He has been unable to stay healthy, but we know that he's a capable wide receiver on an up-and-coming offense or an offense that's going to improve. So if he manages to stay healthy, that's a great value. Do I expect him to stay healthy? No, I don't. I think Zay Flowers is going to come out and be the wide receiver 1 on this team by the end of the season. But if by chance Bateman stays healthy, it's a great pick, and I will look like a genius. So we'll see. And then as far as Foreman goes, this is just a bet on the fact that Khalil Herbert hasn't had to carry a major workload for basically his entire career. So I don't necessarily expect him to do that now. And on top of that, Foreman's bigger than Herbert. He's arguably a better pure rusher than Herbert. So I think he's going to see the field quite a bit. He's not going to be a wide receiver 1, but he's a great bye week fill-in and a great handcuff that is already going to be seeing field time. So I'm just trying to secure that running back position as best I can, given the fact that my second, my RB2 is Dameon Pierce, who also I think is going to be losing touches. So I was just trying to secure it as best I could with the last pick.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that analysis, and I appreciate all of your guys' analysis. Let's talk about just very quickly here, and then we'll get the hell out of here. Who had the best draft?
Not Yeti.
Not
Yeti.
No.
Yeti sucks.
I don't know if he really knows anything about football.
Yeah, I'm not even sure he was using his eyes when he was drafting, but it's okay.
Yeah, I agree.
You just want out of us 3?
Yeah, just us 3.
Scotty, we already know, is a dumpster fire. There's just too much risk on that team.
Agreed.
Not that it couldn't pan out. I think if you're just going to betting odds of the 3, I think there's just a lot of risk there. I think it comes down to myself and Slaps, in my opinion. And I think your running back room, if we're going head to head, my wide receivers have to play out of their mind.
Yeah, I to be honest with you, I would love to this draft. I would love to have this in real life, like a real actual fantasy football format, because I think I would do pretty well. Like you said, I think really where the difference for me is just looking at these. I did take 4 running backs in a row, which is somewhat comical, but I also needed some running backs, and I wanted to shore that up because I did wait so long. I think that's where I have the competitive advantage in this one. I mean, you're limited to 2 running backs. One could be in a timeshare, and the other one may not be ready by the start of the season. So I think that's where I have somewhat of an advantage. But overall, I think that you and I are probably the closest on this draft. Granted, it was a mock draft, and none of us had really been mocking in these positions previously, so it's all good. But I think I would like my team quite a bit.
So I do want to talk about Ramondre. Taking him in the 3rd round, are we confident that he is not going to be in a shared backfield?
That's
something
gamble.
I'm scared. That's the gamble.
That's the gamble.
That's the problem, is that gambling in the 3rd round. I mean, it's one thing to gamble when you're in the 5th and 6th round, but when you're gambling in the 3rd round, you are expecting to get solid production from that player.
I think at that point, and knowing that I was going to have to sacrifice my running backs for this draft because I just wasn't going to have a solid room, and I was okay with that. Granted, Slaps kind of hurt me because Akers I had circled for quite some time, and he took them before I could. But I think that's part of the gamble. If he isn't in a share and he does pop off, sure, you guys are all going to look like idiots and letting me take him in the 3rd round, whereas right now I think that is the gamble. I think that's the point when you look at fantasy football, that is the gamble.
Yeah, no, it is. And that's Ramondre for me. Thankfully, a lot of people aren't doing their drafts until right before the season starts. So hopefully this will get ironed out. But that is one of the concerns for me is Zeke going to show up? Is Dalvin Cook going to show up? Is one of these big name running backs going to show up and steal some time from him? And then you kind of shoot yourself in the foot for taking him in the 3rd. It is a gamble. So let me ask you this question. What player was drafted too soon in your guys' opinion? And we don't need to pick any of our own necessarily. We can if you'd like. But just looking at the board, I have one that I'm eyeing here. And I don't want to be mean to our intern. But Calvin Ridley in the 4th round scares me. And that's probably where his ADP is. But let's also remember that he's 2 years removed from playing NFL football. So I'm not taking that risk in the 4th round. I still think that, I got DeAndre Hopkins in the 4th round. So I would much rather have Hopkins than Ridley. That's just me personally. I'd also rather have Keenan Allen than Ridley. I think Ridley could be great, but hasn't played football in 2 years, and he's going to a brand new home and a new system. So I am a little concerned there. That's just me personally. I'm not saying I'd be curious as your guys' thoughts, but that's just one that stood out to me that is a little scary for me.
See, I think there's some risk with Ridley, but ultimately I don't hate his ADP right now because, again, you're talking about, it's similar to the Deshaun Watson situation where you're talking about a guy who was one of the best in the league at one point in time. So it's just one of those things that I feel you have a potential elite wide receiver one on an up and coming offense. And I also think that people are concerned about the target share situation with, what we saw from Evan Ingram. And I think Evan Ingram's going to take a huge step back this year, like he did for the vast majority of last season. He only performed for 4 weeks out of the entire season. And outside of that, he was outside the top 20 tight ends. So I think that Calvin Ridley could come in, get a major timeshare. I mean, is he worse than Christian Kirk? I don't think he is. So I think he's going to come out and be just fine. So I'm personally fine with taking him there.
Okay. This last question, we'll get out of here. What round felt the grossest?
All of them.
Okay, for not Scotty, but maybe the rest of us. For me, it was like the 5th round. That's kind of where, and I think that's going to be pretty normal. But the 5th round for me was kind of where it was like you could really make or break a team when you start to get in that area, in my opinion.
Yeah, I don't know. It really just depends on how the rest of the draft shakes out. Personally, being in this 10th position, I haven't mocked here before, and I just felt like I wasn't getting value on any of the picks. I felt like I was straining the entire draft, and so I would say as early as the 4th round, I felt uncomfortable. But ultimately, even your 5th round, I mean, you look at your team, the way that you restructured your running back position was phenomenal. I think you handled the situation well. I don't think that there's a spot looking throughout the draft that you should be uncomfortable. I think your team shaked out exactly as you would hope it would shake out.
Yeah, and it did. I like I said, I do feel very comfortable with this team as a very usable team with quite a bit of potential depth. So if I find myself in a hole, I can still hopefully get out. So all right, that's it, Scotty. That's all the time we have. We've been talking for way too long here, and I need a drink, so I'm gonna get the hell out of here. Alan just dropped off the call here, so I think we missed him, but appreciate both you guys doing this. Love you, Alan. Scotty, I love you too. Let's go follow us on all the social medias, and like I said, go read that article that Scotty wrote. I think you did a wonderful job there explaining a little bit more about Jahan Dotson and perhaps why he's getting overlooked and he shouldn't. So go check it out, leatherbrains.com. Cool. All right, we
are
out.
If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you tune into our new releases every week on your favorite podcast app. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and check out leatherbrains.com for all of your fantasy football needs. And remember, Brainiacs, a championship should be more than a fantasy.